G'day everyone, how are you? BennyWallington here, performance coach, and I am stoked to be presenting on tobacco, perspectives, problems, and practice. Caveat, I'm not a doctor or medical practitioner, which I think gives me an advantage in some areas, but I'm making the assumption that you're here to interact with this workshop because you could potentially use some support or someone you know could use some support, whether that's at home or at work. And hope you have a ripping time. I'd like to start with a simple question. Do you think tobacco is good or bad? You don't have to answer it or anything, just hold it in your brain. And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm just going to provide some more information as we go along that might help you inform that decision. And it's not going to be all slamming tobacco like you might hear in other spaces. There'll be some good, some bad, and some ugly. But it's all up to you as to whether you find it interesting and how you'd like to apply it. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking from, the Yugambeh people. I'm on the Gold Coast, which is on Yugambeh country, and I'm paying my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land from which you are listening. And if you'd like, you can download a worksheet at bit.ly/tobaccobw. As with all my workshops, I'd like to invite you into a breathing exercise. So whatever's happened prior to joining us, good, bad, potentially ugly, let's have a breath and focus on being present for our time together. If you feel comfortable, please shut your eyes. And I'd just like you to start to notice your breath and your breathing. How many seconds are you breathing in and out for? Now I'd like you to focus on breathing in and out of your mouth, if you weren't already. Increase your breaths to 3 seconds in and 3 seconds out. Just a nice steady rhythm. Now we're going to remain at 3 seconds in and 3 seconds out. So just once you've got that rhythm, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I'd like you to increase your out breath to 6 seconds. So it'll be in, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and repeat. I'd say you've probably done about 3 rounds by now or somewhere around that. I just want you to sit and sink in and just have a little bit of a feel into your body and your mind and see if there's been any shift. What you've done there is a conscious breathing technique. Some people call it HRV breathing, just heart rate variability. I'm not going to go into that now, but it's an efficient and effective way to breathe, and it can really bring our state into one of sort of coherence. And it's not so unlike another activity that we may have partaken in. And I don't need to really give you a guess, but it's just an interesting thing to muse on when someone's teaching you about conscious breathing, that potentially there's other activities you've been doing where you've actually been conscious breathing, whether that's been positive or not. And I always say, every time you remember to have a conscious breath, and you've got a little bit of a tool there with the 3 in, 6 out, HRV breathing. And sometimes it's even better in a group, because then we get that resonance and the ability to talk as well after we've done our breathwork practices, sometimes in between our breathwork practices. This can allow you to let go of some of that extra tension you might be holding. Tobacco. Common name of the plant, Nicotiana tabacum, is a cured leaf that is used usually after aging and processing in various ways for chewing, snuffing, and the extraction of nicotine, not to mention in smoking ceremonies. We have a fair indication that it's been in the wild for about 8,000 years, and the first known usage is in the Americas, in the Andes, as early as 5000 BC in shamanic rituals. Christopher Columbus is the first European to discover it, apparently. I'm going to say that I think maybe Christopher Columbus gets all the accolades for many things, but that's what came up, so we'll leave that slide. But you may not have heard of a guy named Jean Nicot, who was a fellow who introduced this to France in 1560 from Spain, and from there it spread to England. Interesting. You probably noticed something about the name there, Nicot. ritual uses of tobacco. So First Nations, in this instance, the Métis, who were an indigenous culture in North America, still are, use the tobacco for ceremony, healing, and giving thanks. And these plants are often combined with others within ceremony. You might recognize some of these names. Sage, which is for removing negative energy. Cedar, which is for cleansing and protecting. Sweetgrass, which is bringing spirit of love and kindness. And there's an amazing book, if you ever get the chance, called Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it's got so many beautiful narratives about ritual and indigenous healing and thinking. Out of the 4 commonly used medicinal plants, tobacco is considered the most sacred by these indigenous people, as it's believed to connect them with the spirit world. I find it fascinating because they talk about this simultaneous grounding and stimulation that comes from certain tobacco practices and these rituals, which I find in other parts of performance coaching, in particular around fasting, which is going for extended periods of time without food and just having water. And you feel this crazy energy whilst feeling connected to the earth. And it's really interesting. As someone who doesn't really use tobacco or smoke or do anything like that, I'm fascinated by this being a concept, and it's something to further explore. They use it also for intention setting, which is great through their rituals, and collective wisdom. Now, types of tobacco. You're probably familiar with cigarettes. We'll probably talk a fair bit about cigarettes through this workshop, which is a narrow cylinder containing psychoactive material, which is interesting. Typically tobacco that is rolled into thin paper for smoking. Most cigarettes contain reconstituted tobacco, which consists of recycled tobacco stems, stalks, scraps, collected dust, and floor sweepings. Doesn't sound very appealing, does it? To which are added glue, chemicals, and fillers. The product is then sprayed with nicotine that was extracted from the tobacco scraps. That's an interesting part of the process, and shaped into curls. The cigarette is ignited at one end, causing it to smoulder. The resulting smoke is orally inhaled via the opposite end. Most modern cigarettes are filtered, although the filter does not make them safe. We'll be familiar with cigars as well, most likely. And an interesting fact about cigars is that they contain between 5 to 17 more tobacco than cigarettes. 5 to 17 times more tobacco, and in some cases, 10 to 20 times more nicotine. That's pretty wild. E-cigarettes, these are there's plenty of articles online around whether these are better or worse, and the science is still a little bit out on this. However, I'd highly suggest that you do your research on this and your research on all of these things if you decide that that is an option, or if you are smoking e-cigarettes. Anywho, snuff and snus. So snuff, which is available in loose tobacco form, in dissolvable lozenges or strips, can be in a tea bag-like sachet, and snus can be consumed through the mouth or inhaled into the nose. And word of warning, if you're trying to impress women from the Nordic countries and they have snus, it's a pretty big thing. It's very strong sometimes, and it can lead to vomiting. Chewing tobacco consists of shredded tobacco in the form of loose leaves. So you might have seen that. That's kind of famous in the US. I read a few things about that just not really taking off in Australia. So you might have seen it like baseballers and a spit, and that's the chewing tobacco. History of tobacco in Australia. So actually in the 1700s, pre-colonisation trade occurred between travellers from the north, such as Indonesian fishermen. So that's pretty interesting. I actually got an Indigenous teacher named Arnie Lois, and she taught us that there was a lot of trade going on pre-colonisation. So people would come to Australia and trade in knowledge and technologies. And then obviously in 1770, things changed a little bit. However, for those convicts, it was restricted and unreliable to source. I guess they'd come a long way because they probably weren't aware that it had been coming from Indonesia at the time as well. But in the 1800s, it was became more readily available, and it was essentially a commodity routinely used for servants, prisoners, and ticket of leave men as an inducement to work, so as an incentive, and then withheld as a means of punishment. So if you're thinking back to why potentially we have got to where we've got to, or we had big spikes of people smoking through the 1900s, which I'll talk to in a moment, it makes sense if it was such a highly sought after reward. But homegrown tobacco was outlawed, and in 1803 it was sanctioned. Illegal crops continue to flourish, however, and I guess that's the start of where we've led to today. And according to Contemporary Observer in 1819, about 80 to 90% of male labourers were smokers. So the cigarette became ubiquitous in the trenches of the First World War, during which more than 60% of tobacco donated to the Allies on the Western Front was part of their rations, which arrived in the form of cigarettes. Interesting. Again, a reward. But by the end of World War II, we actually had 1/4 of Australian women smoking as well. And that coincided with more women arriving in the workforce. And also, by this stage, 3/4 of Australian males were smoking. Although, by the second half of the 1900s, it brought confirmation that tobacco use was a major cause of death and disease. However, female smoking continued to increase, which peaked at 1/3 of all females in the mid-1970s, by which time smoking in males had begun to decline, which is now down to 11 to 12% today, people smoking in Australia. When was smoking first considered dangerous? You might find this interesting, that in 1602, an anonymous English author published an essay titled Work of Chimney Sweepers, which stated that illnesses often seen in chimney sweepers were caused by soot and that tobacco may have similar effects. Smart author. In 1795, Samuel Thomas von Sommering of Maine, Germany, reported that he was becoming more aware of cancer on the lips of pipe smokers. In 1798, the US physician Benjamin Rush wrote on the medical dangers of tobacco, and during the 1920s, the first medical reports linking smoking to lung cancer began to appear. Many newspaper editors refused to report these findings as they did not want to offend tobacco companies who advertise heavily in the media. A series of major medical reports in the 1950s and 60s confirmed that tobacco caused a range of serious diseases. So this is from the Australian Government Department of Health. Some companies might sell tobacco products that look like they might be healthy for you, but there is no safe level of tobacco consumption. The best option is always to quit smoking. Why is it legal then, government? All tobacco contains nicotine and other toxic chemicals. Even if you don't breathe in the smoke, you still absorb harmful chemicals through the lining of your mouth. You may have seen this ad, every cigarette is doing you damage. One of the more famous ones. I actually used to work at the agency who created it, and it still runs from time to time. And it's basically like 1997. How many years is that? That's heaps of years. So it's such a poignant description of why it'd probably be best to give the cigarettes a flick. Smoking causes lung cancer, blindness, and other health conditions that can be fatal. Benefits of awareness in the workplace: less absenteeism, increased productivity, decreased early retirement, lower annual healthcare costs, lower risks of accidents, reduced risk of legal action, reinforcing commitment to healthy workplaces, raises awareness of health risks, encourages employees to cut down or quit. Now I'm going to change a bit of gears here. This is kind of more my jam, which is biohacking. Which if you don't know what biohacking is, it's just health optimization. And it's introducing cybernetic devices. Cybernetic is just a fancy term for something with a feedback loop. So your Apple Watch or your phone giving you information about your biometrics, which are just your markers of how you're operating in a continual feedback, is a cybernetic device, or biochemicals to improve performance. So biochemicals could be something like tobacco, could be something like nootropics you may have heard of, coffee, there's all sorts of things. And moderate doses of nicotine can enhance performance and improve working memory. Now, I have to caveat, none of this is a recommendation, especially not for people with addictions, as I'm not sure that anyone that I've read about within the biohacking health optimization space has actually had an addiction to tobacco and then is now using it as a performance enhancer. So I just need to caveat that one. So moderate doses of nicotine can enhance performance and improve working memory, which is your locomotive, moving with greater control and precision, or your cognition, which is memory consolidation. It can also increase the density and efficiency of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, or NACHRSs, which is the part of the nervous system responsible for memory function. Interestingly, nicotine's addictive potential and its cognitive enhancing benefits are inextricable, which means they're closely linked through the neurotransmitters they depend upon. And nicotine is addictive because it binds two of those NACHRSs, which trigger the release of feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine and glutamate, which you may have heard of before. And your body responds by creating more NACHRSs. I feel like Mary Poppins. And then you have to consume more and more nicotine to continue to feel its effects. When you attempt to quit, you experience withdrawal symptoms and you have to smoke or consume some form of nicotine just to function normally. Now, all this information I'm getting from Ben Greenfield, who is a performance coach and health optimization specialist, does his research, and again, it's just his opinion. Moderate doses enhance cognition is something that he says. So around the 1 to 2.5 milligram mark is what he uses, but high doses inhibit it. High doses, no good. And still, he has a caveat, and there's a caveat across this whole thing. It is addictive. We've already said that several times. So he only uses it on high cognitive load days. You know, those days when you're feeling a little bit flat. So just keep that in mind. Now, there's a process that I love to do around any form of vice, whether it be smoking, drinking, chocolate, Netflix, anything like that. And it's called the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Clint Eastwood epic by that name, but it's worth revisiting. If you haven't watched that movie, definitely check it out. That's Clint right there in his prime with a bit of a stogie in his mouth. And so what I want you to do is, if you've got a page there or if you've got your worksheet, you can even do it on your phone, split the page into 3 columns, set a timer for 2 minutes each, and list any words or phrases that come up when you think about smoking or tobacco in general. And you can just pause and do that in your own time. And then once you've got all this on the paper, it's really awesome once you write things down. That's why journaling gets such a good rap. Just sit there and breathe it in. Just have a bit of a look at it. See what's sticking out. Are the uglies a long list, or is there quite a few goods in there? Are you using it in the wrong way? Is the bad column getting smashed? What's the balance look like? And guess what? Here's a really interesting thing that I only just found out, because Clint Eastwood is probably one of the coolest American actors to live, and he's had a career spanning the last 60 years, and he has never smoked. So that dude was on the silver screen for 6 decades, making smoking look cool. I'm not sure if he still does it anymore, but back in the days, he was definitely the cowboy with the cigar. I wasn't actually going to use an example like this. However, the universe provided, I guess, and I ended up speaking with a friend I hadn't spoken with in a year and a half, who is a 31-year-old copywriter from the UK. And we started talking about his health optimization journey, and cigarettes were kind of big for him, having smoked for 11 years. And he tried to quit multiple times before, and he came across this book and followed these steps and hasn't smoked since. Now, whether or not you believe in people showing up at the right time like I do, I feel like there's a part of me that has to deliver this information to you at this point. It might not be for you, but it'll be someone on this call that will hear this and do something about it. Now, there's a fellow called Alan Carr, and he's got a bunch of steps. He's got a really famous book. He's just partnered last year with the World Health Organization to help stop smoking around the world. He's helped over 50 million smokers in the past 35 years. This is not really a plug for him. I've not used it, but I'm just sharing or channeling some information to you. And I'm going to go through his top 10 things when it comes to quitting smoking, because some of these might stick out and some of them resonate with me in the work that I do. So set your time and date. If you're going to quit smoking naturally, set your time and date, but carry on smoking as usual right up until that date. That's the day. Don't try and cut that down beforehand. Just become aware of how you're smoking up until that date. Some of these things are going to sound a bit counterintuitive, but hey, they seem to work. Look forward. Remember, you're not giving up anything because cigarettes do absolutely nothing for you at all. They provide you with no genuine pleasure or crutch. Get it clear in your mind, you are not losing anything. You're making a marvelous positive gain, not only into health, energy, and money, but also in confidence, self-respect, freedom, and most important of all, the length and quality of your life. Have a final cigarette. You're going to give up, so you make a solemn vow, and then you have that final one. Light your final cigarette and make a solemn vow that regardless of what highs or lows may befall you in the future, you will never puff on another cigarette or take nicotine in any form. Be cool with your withdrawal. So there are physical withdrawals. You may have experienced them in the past, but your body will continue to move onwards and upwards. He says that it doesn't mean you have to be miserable or crave cigarettes. The physical withdrawal is very slight. There is no pain, apparently, and it passes quickly. Socialize as normal. I love this one for any vice. Just because you do a vice with someone doesn't mean you have to keep doing it with them. Although sometimes you do find out that that was the reason you were connected with that person in the first place, which sometimes reshuffles your friendships and relationships. So he says you might be craving a cigarette, so there's no need to avoid smokers, and just don't try and avoid those situations. Go out and enjoy your social occasions right from the start, and do not envy smokers. He says to pity them. That's a bit mean, but hey, whatever. And number 6, think about smoking. Do not try and not think about it. I've heard about this. This is really great. It's a really good tactic if you're trying to go to sleep. Just think about, I really want to be awake. I've never wanted to be awake more so in my life, if you really can't sleep, and see what happens. He says it's like if someone tells you, don't think about a brick wall, what are you going to think about? Just make sure that whenever you are thinking about it, you're not thinking, I want a cigarette, but instead, isn't it marvelous? I don't need to smoke anymore. There's no such thing as just one after you quit smoking. So never be fooled into thinking that the odd cigarette, just to be social or to get over a difficult moment, will be okay. Avoid substitutes such as patches, gums, nasal sprays, and e-cigarettes. It'll just keep the addiction alive. Ditch your cigarettes, which actually is really interesting because I have a story about this, which is, he says, do not keep cigarettes on you or anywhere else in case of emergency. If you do, it means you're doubting your decision. I had a client I was helping with her drinking habits, and her friend left cigarettes at her place, even though she said she'd quit, which in turn, she started smoking again because they were on her bench. I told her to call her friend and tell her that she was throwing her cigarettes out if she did not come and get them in the next 24 hours. Her friend came and picked them up, and she, as far as I'm aware, hasn't smoked ever since. What a terrible friend. Number 10, enjoy your freedom. Live a smoke-free life and be on your guard not to fall back into the trap. So he says that life will soon go back to normal as a non-smoker, but be on your guard not to fall back into the trap. If your brain ever starts playing tricks on you by thinking just one, remember there is no such thing. And this is what Lav had to say. There is not a single positive emotion or feeling that smoking gave me that I don't feel in a stronger and more positive way now I've quit. And he does a lot of journaling. He's a writer. So I feel like that's a really important part of transitioning any habit, is thinking about what you're feeling now and how much that's improved. From habits to healthy rituals, I'm just going to leave you with something that I love to talk about when it comes to habits. So I kind of think of habits a little bit mediocre, a little bit naff. So where possible, we want to upgrade to something called a ritual. And you might have different definition, but I'll say in this instance, it's something that, and I use this RPG method, something you do with regularity. And the P is something you have pride in telling your friends and family about. And the G is something that tells the story of where you are going in life. Now, I have this image, has nothing to do with tobacco. Actually has to do with a workshop I ran, and I was speaking to one of my favourite thinkers, quite a successful male up here in the Northern Rivers, and I was suggesting him to look into his rituals. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard it, but he said, I'm too busy for rituals. I don't have time for rituals. And I said, okay, what is the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning? And he said he went to his daughter, who's 3 years old's room, and they would go outside and they would share the dreams that they had had the previous night and talk about them. The whole workshop went quiet. I'm still picking my jaw up off the floor because that's one of the most beautiful rituals I've ever heard. So my point here is, if you have that kind of feeling that rituals don't exist for you, have a think about what you do in your day-to-day. Start with the morning, and there might be something really special, and that could really be the hook to allow you to think about what makes that special and how you can build more ritual into your life. And if you're finding yourself having trouble, there's plenty of great resources like the Health Direct hotline or Quitline, and there's a link here as well to health.gov.au. Thanks so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. It's been a learning for myself, considering I don't smoke, and I'd love you to take your learnings with you. If you haven't already, please download the workshop sheet at bit.ly/tobaccobw. Have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening.